London, November 11th, 1918, 11 o'clock in the morning. Church bells ring across a city that believes it has witnessed the end of the war to end all wars. In Whitehall, crowds gather to celebrate victory. But in the Treasury building, a different kind of mathematics is being calculated. Chancellor of the Exchequer Bonar Law sits before ledgers that tell a story the crowds will never hear. Britain, the empire upon which the sun never set, is bankrupt. The numbers are staggering, almost incomprehensible. 4 years ago, Britain was the world's creditor. Today, it owes more money than it has ever possessed in its entire history. The war that was supposed to last months has consumed not just millions of lives, but the accumulated wealth of centuries. The British pound, once the unquestioned master of global commerce, now exists only through the mercy of American bankers. This is not the story they teach in schools. This is not the narrative of noble sacrifice and heroic victory that fills the monuments and memoirs. This is the hidden history of World War I, where the real battles, were fought not in trenches, but in banking houses, not with bullets, but with bonds. And the consequences of those financial wars still govern every transaction, every debt, every economic crisis that unfolds today. August 1914. The Austro-Hungarian Empire declares war on Serbia. Within weeks, the great powers of Europe are mobilizing millions of men for what they believe will be a brief, decisive conflict. But there is another mobilization happening simultaneously, one that will prove far more consequential than any military campaign: the mobilization of capital. War, it turns out, is the most expensive human endeavor ever conceived. A single artillery shell costs more than a working man earns in a month. A battleship consumes the equivalent of a small city's annual budget. And modern industrial warfare demands both on a scale never before imagined. The French discover this brutal arithmetic first. Within months of the war's beginning, the Bank of France is hemorrhaging gold reserves. The franc, that proud symbol of republican virtue, begins to tremble against its foreign rivals. Finance Minister Alexandre Ribot faces an impossible choice: default on the nation's obligations or mortgage France's future to foreign creditors. Across the English Channel, similar calculations are devastating the British Treasury. Chancellor David Lloyd George, a man who had built his career on fiscal responsibility, watches in horror as Britain's national debt explodes from $625 million to over $7 billion in just 4 years. It is not merely an increase, it is the complete transformation of British economic reality. But it is Germany that faces the most brutal mathematics of all. The Central Powers discover that modern warfare is not just about industrial capacity, but about financial endurance. The British naval blockade is not merely starving Germany of food and materials, it is severing the financial arteries that connect the German economy to global markets. Cut off from international capital, Germany is forced to resort to the most dangerous economic expedient known to history: printing money to fund war. The Reichsbank, that pillar of Prussian financial discipline, becomes a printing press for national suicide. As billions of new marks flood the German economy, each one represents not just diluted purchasing power, but a mortgage on Germany's post-war future. By 1918, Germany is not merely militarily defeated, it is financially eviscerated. But the most profound transformation is happening across the Atlantic. America enters the war in April 1917, not merely as a military force, but as the world's new creditor. The Federal Reserve, created just 4 years earlier, becomes the central bank not just of America, but of the entire Allied war effort. J.P. Morgan & Coors serves as the purchasing agent for Britain and France, channeling billions of American dollars into European war production. But these are not gifts of democratic solidarity. They are loans, secured against everything the European powers possess. British gold reserves flow to New York vaults. French colonial revenues are pledged to American creditors. By war's end, America holds financial liens on the British Empire itself. The moment of truth comes at Versailles, where the victorious powers gather to divide the spoils of victory. But the real negotiations are not about territory or sovereignty. They are about debt collection. The famous Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, that assigns responsibility for the war to Germany, is not merely a moral judgment. It is a legal foundation for the largest debt collection operation in human history. Germany is to pay reparations totaling 132 billion gold marks, a sum so vast that it exceeds the entire German national income for multiple years. But this is only the beginning of the financial restructuring of Europe. The war has created a pyramid of debt that reaches from Berlin to Paris to London to New York, each level dependent on the one below. Germany must pay France and Britain. France and Britain must pay America. And at the apex of this pyramid sits the Federal Reserve, the quiet architect of the new global financial order. The war that was fought to preserve the balance of power in Europe has instead created an American financial empire that dwarfs anything the old world had ever known. The consequences unfold with mathematical precision over the following decade. Germany, crushed under the weight of reparations, resorts to hyperinflation. The mark, once a symbol of Germanic precision, becomes worthless paper. Wheelbarrows of currency are needed to buy a loaf of bread. An entire middle class is wiped out overnight, their savings evaporated in the furnace of monetary collapse. But hyperinflation is not chaos, it is policy. By destroying the mark, Germany effectively defaults on its reparations obligations. What cannot be repaid disappears in a cloud of worthless currency. It is financial warfare by other means, and it works. By 1924, the reparations scheme is already crumbling under the weight of its own impossibility. The Dawes Plan of 1924 attempts to rationalize the irrational. American banks will loan money to Germany so that Germany can pay reparations to France and Britain, so that France and Britain can pay their war debts to America. It is a circular flow of debt that exists only as long as confidence in the system remains intact. For 5 years, this financial carousel spins successfully. American capital flows to Germany. German reparations flow to Europe. European debt payments flow to America. But it is a system built on sand, dependent entirely on the continuation of American prosperity and lending. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The New York Stock Exchange collapses, and with it, the entire architecture of post-war finance. American lending to Germany stops overnight. Without American capital, Germany cannot pay reparations. Without German reparations, France and Britain cannot service their American debts. The circular flow becomes a downward spiral. The Great Depression is not merely an American phenomenon. It is the collapse of the financial order created by World War I. The debts incurred in that conflict have created dependencies and vulnerabilities that now threaten the stability of the entire world economy. Banks fail across 3 continents. Currencies collapse, unemployment soars, and in the chaos, new political forces emerge to challenge the liberal order itself. In Germany, a failed artist named Adolf Hitler builds his political movement on the ruins of economic catastrophe. His message is simple. The Treaty of Versailles, with its impossible reparations and financial humiliations, has made normal political and economic life impossible. Only through the complete rejection of the post-war order can Germany hope to survive. The Nazi rise to power is not merely the result of political extremism, it is the logical consequence of financial impossibility. The debts created by World War I have made democracy itself unviable. When a political system cannot deliver economic survival, populations turn to alternatives, however radical. By 1933, Hitler is in power, and one of his first acts is the complete repudiation of Germany's remaining reparations obligations. It is not merely a political gesture, it is a declaration of financial independence from the order created at Versailles. The circular flow of debt that had defined the 1920s is finally definitively broken. But the consequences of World War I's financial legacy extend far beyond the rise of fascism. The war has fundamentally altered the relationship between money and power on a global scale. The gold standard, that Victorian arrangement that had provided monetary stability for nearly a century, lies in ruins. In its place emerges a new system of managed currencies and central bank intervention. The Federal Reserve, created in the shadow of financial panic, emerges from the war as the most powerful financial institution in human history. Its decisions about interest rates and money supply now affect economic conditions across the globe. The war has not merely shifted political power from Europe to America, it has created a new form of power altogether, monetary hegemony. The British pound, dethroned from its position as the world's reserve currency, limps through the interwar period as a shadow of its former self. The Bank of England, once the conductor of the global financial orchestra, now plays second fiddle to the Federal Reserve. The British Empire, built on financial as much as military dominance, begins its long retreat from global leadership. France, meanwhile, discovers that victory in war does not necessarily translate to victory in peace. The enormous costs of reconstruction, combined with the impossibility of collecting meaningful reparations from Germany, leave the French economy permanently weakened. The franc becomes a symbol not of Republican strength, but of European decline. The consequences compound across the decades. The financial instabilities created by World War I contribute directly to the outbreak of World War II. The Great Depression, itself a result of the unsustainable debt structures created by the First War, provides the economic chaos in which fascism thrives. The Second War then requires even more massive financial mobilization, further cementing American financial dominance. By 1945, the transformation is complete. The Bretton Woods Conference creates a new international monetary system with the dollar at its center. Gold becomes subordinate to American currency. The Federal Reserve becomes, in effect, the world's central bank. What began as a European conflict over Balkan politics has ended with American financial hegemony over the entire globe. But even this is not the end of World War I's financial legacy. The structures of debt, the relationship between central banks, the mechanisms of international lending created in that conflict continue to shape economic reality today. When the European Union struggles with debt crises, when emerging markets face capital flight, when central banks coordinate monetary policy, they are operating within frameworks first established during the Great War. The euro crisis of 2010 is directly descended from the reparations crisis of 1923. The same fundamental problem persists. How can debtor nations maintain both their sovereignty and their solvency when creditor nations demand both repayment and austerity? The mathematics that destroyed Germany in the 1920s nearly destroyed Greece in the 2010s. Contemporary central banking, with its complex interventions in bond markets and currency exchanges, evolved directly from the emergency measures first implemented during World War I. The Federal Reserve's quantitative easing programs of the 21st century used techniques pioneered during the crisis of 1914-1918. The war that was supposed to end all wars instead created the financial tools that govern all subsequent wars. Even the current structure of international debt bears the DNA of World War I's financial innovations. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund, created in the aftermath of World War II, operate according to principles first established when American bankers restructured European war debts in the 1920s. When these institutions demand structural adjustment programs from developing nations, they are applying lessons learned from Germany's reparations crisis. The transformation of money itself from gold-backed currency to purely fiat systems managed by central banks began with the financial pressures of total war. Every paper dollar, every digital euro, every electronic transaction today exists within a monetary system, first sketched out in the crisis years of 1914-1918, modern financial markets. With their complex derivatives and global interconnections, evolved from the mechanisms first developed to finance industrial warfare. The techniques used to securitize mortgages in the 2000s were pioneered by banks packaging war bonds in the 1910s. The mathematical models used to price risk today grew from actuarial calculations, first developed to assess the costs of mass mechanized killing. This is the hidden history of our current moment. We live within an economic system forged in the crucible of industrial warfare, shaped by the mathematics of mass destruction, governed by institutions created to manage the debts of dead empires. The financial crisis of 2008, the European debt crisis, the rise of central bank intervention in markets, the dominance of the dollar, the instability of developing world currencies, all of these phenomena trace their origins back to that moment in 1914 when the old world began its self-destruction. The numbers on our bank statements, the interest rates on our mortgages, the currencies in our wallets, all exist within frameworks first established when European civilization decided to mortgage its future to pay for its own annihilation. We are still living in the financial shadow of those 4 years when humanity learned that modern war is not won by the bravest or the strongest, but by whoever can borrow the most money and survive the consequences. The Great War ended on November 11th, 1918, but its financial consequences echo across every subsequent decade, shaping every crisis, governing every recovery, determining the winners and losers of our contemporary world. The war that was supposed to make the world safe for democracy instead made it safe for creditors. World War I did not end in 1918. It simply changed from a military conflict to a financial one, and in that transformed state, it continues to shape our world today with the same remorseless mathematics that once filled the trenches of the Western Front.